is Abel Montoya. I work at the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, and as an agency, what we do is we help kids go to college. In a nutshell. We also administer the state grant, the Monetary Award Program, to over 125,000 individuals each year. My role within the agency is to oversee the ISAC Corps. The ISAC Corps is a group of recent college graduates that we hired for a 2 to 3 year term to be near peer mentors out in the community. So we place them throughout the whole state of Illinois. They do workshops, they do presentations, they work with students one-on-one, they troubleshoot, they help them when they get stuck, okay? Because the process can be complicated. And what we've encountered in our workshops and interactions is that oftentimes one of the most challenging pieces is the verification process and issues that students may have with completing the process so that financial aid can be dispersed. And one common theme we've seen are issues with tax filing, either taxes not being filed properly or not at all. So what we're going to do today is, or what I like to do today is to talk a little bit about the financial aid process, give you a foundation or a basic understanding of how it works, and then dive into the verification piece and the troubleshooting that we do. And hopefully this information will help you with your families and your students to be proactive, so you avoid the situations when that time comes for your students to fill out the form itself, whether it's the FAFSA or the alternative application for Illinois financial aid. Paying for college is a challenge for most. I have a little one, a 6-year-old, and I keep thinking every day, okay, how am I going to pay for college? And this is why we start saving early, right? We have lots of questions. Parents have lots of questions. You have lots of questions. And when you juxtapose the immigration status of an individual with this process, it becomes even more complicated, right? Undocumented students may not know what to do. They may think they're not eligible for any type of financial aid. In reality, they are. We have students who come from blended families. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term, that may be where some of the individuals are U.S. citizens or permanent residents, while others are undocumented, okay? So that kind of muddies the waters for individuals. Ultimately, everyone wants to know, well, how much is it going to cost me? Can I afford to go to college? Do I qualify for financial aid? For students, undocumented students, should I fill out the FAFSA or should I not? What is the alternative application for Illinois financial aid? Now, how do I apply? And ultimately, where do I get help? All these questions, come to the forefront as students are trying to navigate their own path, trying to figure out how do they get to that end goal, whether that's a certificate, an associate's degree, a 4-year degree, or perhaps beyond, maybe a master's, maybe it's a professional licensure, it could be a JD, a litany of different things. Everyone has a path that's right for them, but there's no one path that's right for everybody. So that's why when we work with students, we try to figure out what's their end goal, what do they want to do, and how do we get there with as few problems as possible. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts and dive into the weeds, I want to talk a little bit about what financial aid is. Okay. Now, financial aid is money that's given to families or students so they can afford to go to college, basically. So say the cost of attendance is like this much, and say a family can afford this much. That gap that's in between is what financial aid is supposed to fill. The question is, how is it filled? There are two main types of financial aid. There's gift aid, which is exactly that money that is given. It's given to students for purposes of pursuing their education. And it comes in two forms, the grants and scholarships. With grants, there's typically a need component. And with scholarships, the criteria could be whatever the scholarship organization deems their criteria to be. Then we have self-help aid. And this is money that is given to student in exchange for something else. Okay, now it's important to understand the differences because each one may have different requirements into how to receive it and who's eligible to receive it. But the guiding point is, where does this money come from? What's the source of financial aid? There are 4 main sources. There's the federal government, which would be the federal student aid, so like the FAFSA. There's the state government, and in Illinois, it would be us, the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. There's the college itself, and there's the private sources. The reason why it's important to know the source of the financial aid is because each source has its own eligibility requirements for the student. And I'll keep mentioning the student because everything is based on student eligibility. The immigration status of the parents does not matter for purposes of administering financial aid. It's all about the status of the student. If a student's a U.S. citizen or U.S. permanent resident, they qualify for all 4 sources, okay? Because for the federal government, you have to be a U.S. citizen or U.S. permanent resident for the student. Now, at the state level, and I'll talk about the changes at the state level. At the state level, currently, if you're not a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, the student can still qualify for state aid in Illinois if they meet certain criteria. And my colleague Sarah did a session earlier about the alternative application, so I'll revisit a few points of that in this presentation, right? Now, for the college really, it's totally up to them as to what the criteria is going to be to award institutional aid. Right. And for the outside private sources, those would be your private scholarships. And each scholarship, it's different. Some are awarded based on academics, some are awarded based on community service. It could be based on major, it could be based on gender. It's a litany of different things. But since it's their money, they decide what the criteria is going to be. So understanding that there are multiple sources and each one has different criteria for eligibility will help you guide a student to figure out what works for them and what may not be an option, because there's always some type of option for any student, regardless of his or her status. And oftentimes we get students who say, hey, well, what's the point? My family doesn't have any money whatsoever. I can't afford to go to college. Well, let's start with understanding that financial aid is possible. For example, in the state of Illinois, if you go to a MAP-approved college, which would be a public university or community college or any of the not-for-profit private colleges in Illinois, we're talking about 125 colleges, you qualify for the MAP grant. Someone who has maximum need, basically very little ability to pay for college, they could get the full MAP grant, which is currently $54.96. If the student is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, they can also qualify for the Pell Grant, which is $64.95 currently, and that's going to go up another $400 for next year. So between these 2 grants, which are need-based, because remember, grant is need-based, they can get almost up to $12,000. Now, for the student who's undocumented, they won't qualify for the Pell Grant, but they could qualify for the MAP grant, at least that piece. And that could help really maybe bridge that gap between what it costs and what they can afford for purposes of contributing to their education. Now, how do you apply for this money? Well, there's an application. Just for most things in life, you have to fill something out, right? The main form is the FAFSA form. That's the free application for federal student aid, right? The operative word there being free. Now, and that's for students who are U.S. citizens or U.S. permanent residents, and that will consider students for everything, basically. Federal money, state money, and in most cases, institutional money. Now, for the student who doesn't qualify for the FAFSA because they're not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, they can fill out the alternative application for Illinois financial aid. And that will qualify them for state aid, like the MAP grant, and institutional aid, right? Now, the other thing too is when I talk to students and families, I remind them that their application for admission is also oftentimes an application for institutional scholarships, okay? They may look at the essays, they may look at the awards that somebody writes on their application or the activities in which they've been involved. All those things help a college determine to whom they wish to give institutional aid. Now, I had mentioned that things had changed in Illinois a while back with the RISE Act. This may be familiar to many of you. So back in 2020, the RISE Act came into effect, and this Illinois statute enables certain individuals to qualify for the state grant that previously were not able to receive it. Now, there's a few different categories, but the main one in which I want to concentrate is the last bullet here in the slide, which is that undocumented students that meet specific criteria will not qualify for the MAP grant. And that began as of January 2020. Every once in a while, we still encounter students who are undocumented who don't realize they actually may qualify under the RISE Act. Now, the application itself is called the Alternative Application for Illinois Financial Aid, but sometimes they conflate the RISE Act with the Alternative Application name itself. Now, who qualifies for that? Just briefly, the student needs to have resided with his or her parent or guardian while attending Illinois public or private high school. They need to have graduated from a public or private high school or received a GED in the state of Illinois. And during that time, they need to have attended at least for 3 years in the K through 12 system. Okay, so it doesn't have to be sophomore, junior, and senior year. If they started here, in elementary school or middle school, then went out of state, and then came back and got their high school diploma and still have 3 years, they still qualify for that. Okay. The other piece is that they need to sign an affidavit stating that as soon as they are eligible for for U.S. permanent residency, they're going to apply. They're going to do so. And in the application itself, it's a click-through option. So they don't have to get anything notarized or anything like that. It's already embedded within the application itself. Okay. And the last piece is they cannot establish residency outside the state of Illinois. The reason for this is because the MAP grant is a state grant. Okay. So the state of Illinois wants those students to stay within the state of Illinois. So if they go out of state, they can't take that MAP grant with them. All right. So that's a really important thing. Now, sometimes students get confused as to say, okay, well, so which one do I complete? Okay. Well, if the student is a U.S. or permanent resident, they fill out the FAFSA. Simple as that. Remember, the status of the parents does not matter. It's all about student eligibility. Okay. If the student is not a U.S. citizen or U.S. permanent resident but meets those criteria I just mentioned, they're considered a qualified undocumented student, and they should fill out the alternative application for Illinois financial aid. But they should not do both. Okay. And the reason you don't do both is because you don't want to confuse the college. Okay. And the other thing too is if a student has DACA, and sometimes people get confused because the FAFSA itself makes a reference to DACA. If they have DACA, technically they could fill out the FAFSA, but they're not going to get any federal aid. Okay. They only weren't going to qualify for state aid or institutional aid. So that's why they need to fill out the alternative application. Real quickly, what's needed? Well, if the students fill out the FAFSA, because students are U.S. citizen or permanent resident, they need their social security number, okay? Parents that do not have a social security number, enter all zeros on the FAFSA, okay? Do not enter an ITIN. We'll talk about ITINs in just a little bit in more detail in just a bit. But the ITIN is only used for tax purposes. It's only used to fill out a tax return, and that's it, okay? You can identify an ITIN because it begins with the number 9. So if you're working with students and you see that the parents put what you think is social security number begins with number 9, that's an ITIN. They need to take that out, enter all zeros on the FAFSA. Okay. If the students are U.S. permanent resident, they also need their the alien registration number. Okay. And then the student needs an FSID so they can sign it. Okay, so that's if they're doing the FAFSA. Okay, so that would be a blended family scenario. The student was born here or is a U.S. permanent resident, but maybe the parents are undocumented. Okay, now for both the FAFSA and the alternative application, because the alternative application is not going to ask for a student's social security number. Okay, we're going to give them an ISAC ID number instead. For both the FAFSA and alternative application, they're going to need records of income. Okay, oftentimes it's the federal tax returns, W-2s, or whatever record they may have to demonstrate the income that they earned. Okay, because the FAFSA and the alternative application is a means by which the college is trying to ascertain what is the ability of this family to pay for college. Okay, so they're going to ask about income. They're also going to ask about assets, investments. So you need that information. With both the FAFSA and alternative application, the student would indicate a list of the colleges to which they wish to send the information. This information that's filled out in the FAFSA alternative app is only shared with those colleges. So the student is saying with whom they wish to have it shared, and also shared with the state of Illinois because we need to award the state grant, but no one else gets access to this information. It's not shared with any other governmental agency whatsoever. Now, if the student fills out the alternative application and the list of colleges, the list will only include MAP-approved colleges. Because remember, the MAP grant can only be used at colleges that are considered MAP approved. So you are not going to find any colleges outside the state of Illinois on the alternative application. On the FAFSA side, it's very different. It's going to include all the colleges across the country. Right? Now, one of the things that I've seen also that happens when they're filling out their forms is that sometimes they indicate stuff they shouldn't be indicating or list things that they shouldn't be listing. For the FAFSA or the alternative application, you do not list the home in which you live. So the primary residence, you exclude that. You don't include the value of that home, all right? You don't include the value of your retirement plan, like a 401k, an IRA, a pension. You do not report the value of those. Those are for the parents for them to retire. And for families to have a family-owned business, and I've seen this a lot with in the undocumented community where they basically start their own business. They do an LLC, they have an EIN to do their business. If it's a family-owned business that has 100 or fewer full-time employees, you do not report the value of that business, okay? When you tell this information to parents, they usually feel a little bit more comfortable now filling out that FAFSA, the alternative application. Now, 529 plans. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. I'm a big advocate of 529 plans. A 529 plan is a savings plan that grows tax-free as long as it's used for educational purposes. That's it. That's all it is. Every state has one, okay? In the state of Illinois, there's actually a few. There's the Bright Start, the Bright Direction, and the prepaid plan, okay? When the Illinois Dream Act, which is a state statute, when that passed, it said that anyone in the state of Illinois that meets certain criteria can actually participate in the Bright Start, Bright Direction, or prepaid plan. So for families who may be undocumented and they have little ones, this is a great way by which they can start saving for their child's education, because all they need is an ITIN, okay? And an ITIN for the student, an ITIN for the parent, if they do not have Social Security numbers, okay? But these are considered assets, but this will help, bridge that gap between what they can afford and what it costs to college as they start doing this early. So for when you have families who think, how can I start saving for college? This is a really good way because, as I mentioned, the money grows tax-free. That's number one. And number two, in the state of Illinois, when someone participates in a 529 plan, when you do your state tax return, it lowers the taxable income by the amount that you contributed to the 529 plan, all right? If you're an aunt or an uncle like myself, you can start one for your nieces and nephews. If you're a grandparent, you can start one for your grandkid. Okay, so this is a way by which we as a community can help others who may need assistance. Okay, as the owner of a plan, you can also change beneficiaries as long as they're within the family, usually like a first relation. So for example, I have one for my niece, right? For some reason, my niece and I have a falling out. I don't like her life choices. I don't know, whatever you may say, right? I could always make my son the beneficiary because they're first cousins. Okay, so I can transfer it around. So it offers a lot of flexibility. So this is something that I've noticed in the communities of undocumented families, that they don't realize they can actually qualify for a 529 plan. Okay, so now back to the process itself. When do you apply? You apply at the same time the alternative application, the FAFSA, after October 1st. After October 1st of a student's senior year, or every year that they are in college. And you do this every single year, okay? For the FAFSA, you go to FAFSA.gov, and for the alternative application, you go to isac.org/alternative app. And we actually have that in Spanish too, if they choose to do it in Spanish. And this will enable a student to be considered for federal and state aid, or if they do alternative application, just for state aid, and then also for institutional aid, right? Now, when you fill out the form, they're going to ask for parental information. And this is where it starts getting a little tricky. This is where I start seeing some issues with the financial aid process for some families. Students have to report parental information unless they meet very, very specific criteria, such as being 24 years of age or older, being married, being a veteran, pursuing a graduate degree, being in legal guardianship as determined by court of state of legal residence. Very, very, very specific situations. If you can't say yes to any of those questions, the student has to report parental information. And the parents are biological parent, adoptive parents, step parents have married, but that's it, no one else. Legal guardians are not parents for purposes of the FAFSA, okay? Aunts, uncles, they're not grandparents, they're not parents for purposes of the FAFSA, because I've seen some students who may be living with a family member and they think, well, I report my family member's information. No, it's always about the parent, okay? And if their parents are divorced or separated, well, it's the parent with whom you live the longest in the last 12 months. And all of this is done to ascertain what is the ability to pay for college, and they generate an expected family contribution. Now, by the way, this terminology at EFC is going to change in a couple of years. It's going to be standard aid index, but for the time being, it's expected family contribution. This is a number. It's a number that says this is what we think the family can afford to pay toward or contribute to their education. And then that's where colleges try to figure out, okay, so what do we make up the difference between what that EFC is and what it costs to attend our college, right? Now, before they get to that point, oftentimes families will be selected for verification. Verification is a process by which they're trying to verify certain pieces to make sure that financial aid is given to those that are eligible to receive it, okay? Sometimes students are randomly selected. I think right now the rate is about 20%, or between 20 and 25% of students are randomly selected for verification. They're also selected when there are data inconsistencies, when something doesn't really jive well. There's an issue there, right? Now, I tell families, don't be alarmed, right? It's okay, it happens to quite a few people, but let's make sure it gets completed, because if the process is not completed, financial aid will not be dispersed. Okay. When someone gets elect verification, they're going to be sent, a letter, either a letter or an email saying we need A, B, and C, and we need it by a certain date. And you have to send A, B, and C by that date, otherwise you're stuck in that verification process. I've seen families send too much info. They send A, B, C, D, E, and F. And that also gets them kind of in trouble sometimes, because if there's anything that contradicts itself, the financial aid office by federal statute has to reconcile those data inconsistencies, okay? And I've seen this happen with W-2s, and I'll get to that in just a bit. But more often than not, families are selected for income verification, okay? And this is where the importance of filing taxes, becomes to the forefront, okay? Now, who needs to file a tax return? So for this past tax cycle, the 2021 year, if someone was single and made $12,550 or more, they're required by law to file a tax return. If they were married, the number is $25,100 or more. All right. Now, and the FAFSA is going to ask, what is the income that you made? First of all, they ask, did you file a tax return? Even if you say, no, I'm not going to file, they're still going to say, well, how much did you make from working? If you say, I'm not going to file, and you indicate that say you're single, or say you're married, you made $26,000, the college is either going to come back to you and say, hey, we want you to file your taxes because you're supposed to, or they may go in a roundabout way saying the same thing, but they'll say, we need you to send us an IRS tax return transcript. An IRS tax return transcript is basically a summary of the information that someone submitted in the tax return. The only way to get that tax return transcript is to file a tax return. Okay. So then that's where the family gets stuck. Okay. Now someone will say, well, Abel, I made 24 grand. So I'm good, right? I'm in the clear. I'm not supposed to file a tax return. Correct. You don't have to file a tax return. But now the college is going to say, hey, we want to verify that actually was the income so that we know that you weren't required to file a tax return. So we want you to send us your W-2s. Then the family says, well, I don't have any W-2s. What do I do? Then it gets a little bit more complicated. You try to figure, okay, well, how do I prove how much I actually made? All right. Now, sometimes the family say, well, I got a W-2, but I got a social security number that doesn't belong to me on the W-2. What should I do? Block it out. Exit out. As long as it's got your name, it's got your address, you can verify that's you. You can block out the social security number on that W-2. If you have a tax return transcript, just send that and nothing else. Don't send any extra W-2s because that can muddy the waters. All right. So this is the first step. Sometimes a family doesn't file and they're told you have to file, otherwise we're stuck here. All right. The other situation would be when they don't make enough money to actually be required to file, and then they have problems trying to document how much money was actually made. That becomes an issue. So I even tell families that don't make that much money that are required to file, to still file a tax return, because then it makes this process so much easier when the child is ready to go to college. Now, families will say, hey, well, I don't have a social security number, so I can't file, right? No, IRS doesn't care about your status. All they care about is their taxes, all right? You tell the IRS, I don't have a social security number. They're like, no problem, we got you. We got this thing called Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, or an ITIN. It's only for tax purposes, but this is how you're going to file your tax return if you don't have a social security number, okay? They're like, well, how much is it going to cost me? Nothing, it's free. IRS will give it to you for free. All you have to do is apply for it. And that's why there are these organizations, not-for-profit organizations. For example, the Chicagoland area, there's a group called Ladder Up that can help families not only file the tax return, but also solicit or get an ITIN. Any tax preparer can help you get an ITIN. It's easy to do. So you get that for yourself or for anybody in the family whose information you need in the tax return. All right. Then some family says, hey, well, I don't have a W-2. I get paid cash. Not a problem. IRS, they just want to know how much money did you make from working. And so when you go work with a tax preparer, if you got paid cash, oftentimes they'll say, well, you can file like as being self-employed. Okay, it's almost like an independent contractor, even though you may not necessarily be an independent contractor. Okay, now for those who are actually independent contractors, you may get an employee identification number, EIN. All right, either way, a taxpayer will help a family file their taxes. And the key thing is to file the taxes properly. And filing a tax return is scary. I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen. I do my taxes. I double check, triple check everything every time I do it, because I don't want to make a mistake, right? I'm a little concerned because this is a federal agency. I can understand the hesitation from undocumented families saying, oh my goodness, I'm sending my information to a federal agency. IRS doesn't share anything with anybody. All right. They're just interested in your taxes. They don't care about your immigration status. There is no question on the tax return that makes you indicate your immigration status when reporting your income made. Okay. So that's the first thing, trying to get parents to fill out a tax return if they haven't done one in the past, or they don't think they can, or they don't know how. Let's get them to that first step and connect them with the proper tax preparer. I always tell families, I go, first of all, I'm not a tax expert. So when you have some complicated tax situations, go talk to a tax preparer, a qualified tax preparer. Kind of like attorneys, you have them, there's all kinds, there's some good ones and not so good ones, all right? Same thing with tax preparers. Go with a reputable one. Go one that's not gonna do anything, unscrupulous, all right? Because sometimes, not sometimes, this is way too often for my taste, in my opinion, we come across families where both parents file head of household and they're married and or living together. And why does this happen? They want to get a bigger refund. They go to this taxpayer and say, hey, listen, you got 2 kids. How about you count one and you count another one? And then you say, wink, wink, you live in apartment A, you live in apartment B. So you guys are really separated, but we know you're not, and I'm paraphrasing completely here. All right. Or exaggerating to a certain extent, but these families do that. To file as head of household, parents must be unmarried, okay? Which means the marriage is over. So they don't necessarily have to be divorced, but they have to be living separate lives, okay? If that's not the case, they cannot file as head of household, and I've seen this happen quite a bit. And then that means that the parents have to go back and do an amended tax return, because then the college says, okay, your FAFSA, your marital status indicates that you're married, okay? But over here, you file as head of household. That's not possible, okay? This is conflicting information. The information provided on the FAFSA conflicts with the information you did in your tax return or how you file, all right? Then the student gets stuck there, and then the parents start getting scared, like, what do we do now, all right? Sometimes parents will say, well, I just haven't filed for a while. What's a while? 10 years. Okay, well, I think we need to file. And the reason you want to do that is because when you do the math, that slide earlier when I talked about the MAP grant and the Pell Grant, where you have for a U.S. citizen, student who was born here. If the parents don't file their taxes and the student gets stuck in the verification process, they're missing out on almost 12 grand of grant money each year. So I point that out to families so they can do the math internally. I don't tell them you have to do this. I tell them what's going to happen if they don't do it. All right, I'm going to tell them what the situation is going to be, so they understand the ramifications of their choices. Okay, because they may owe some taxes, some back taxes, but it may be a lot less compared to what they're going to gain for their child. Right. Now, what happens if they do have to file an amended tax return? Okay, be patient. That's the key thing. This past year, and of course, this related to the tax modifications or tax code changes that did a number of years back. But the IRS is behind with a lot of things. For individuals to file an amended tax return, they actually have to mail it in. And this past tax cycle, it took between 4 to 6 months to get it processed. Okay, so they can still do a FAFSA alternative application with estimates, but they won't be able to get that tax account transcript. The tax return transcript is a summary of the information provided in a tax return. But if you do an amended tax return, you're going to have to get an IRS tax account transcript and provide that to the college. All right. So it may take a while with that amended tax return. So there's a delay there. Okay. And here's the other thing too. When you fill out your FAFSA or alternative application. So the alternative application FAFSA for the 22-23 year, which is this upcoming academic year, they require 2020 tax information. For the 23-24 FAFSA year, so that would be parents of current juniors, when they fill out that FAFSA come October 1st of 2022, and they're going to fill out the FAFSA alternative after the 23-24 year, they're going to ask for 2021 tax information. So this past cycle. So there's like a year behind. So if they've had issues with their tax return, it's not just going to be for 1 year, it's going to be for like at least 2 years. So this will cause a delay in those financial aid offers if you're stuck in that verification process. And the way the financial aid offers are sent to students is that the college looks at their cost of attendance, subtract that expected family contribution to figure out what is the financial need. And then what is the student eligible to receive from the federal government, from the state of Illinois, and then ultimately from the institution itself, and then looking at what other types of outside awards they may be receiving. Right, but you don't get to that point unless the verification process is complete. And very rarely will a college send a financial aid offer without the verification process being completed. Those financial aid offers, those letters that they get either through the mail or now more often than not through like the college student portal or their email to the students, it has information, about the cost of that college, what eligibility or what financial aid were they eligible to receive, and this is where the families kind of figure out what makes sense for us financially, what's viable, what's not viable, what are we expected to pay out of pocket. You want to get to this point so you can make an informed decision. So when the student's ready to go to college, finances aren't as big a concern or as big as an obstacle as they could be, because if you can't afford a certain institution and you owe them money, they're going to financially encumber a student, which means there's going to be a hole in their record and they can't move forward. Okay. And then if they try to transfer to another institution, the college is not going to release the transcript. So then they get stuck. And you don't want to be in that scenario. You want to avoid that pitfall. In summary, there's a few tips and reminders that are provided for everybody. Do it as soon as possible after October 1st. So in case they get selected verification, you can provide the documentation. Everything that's submitted to the financial aid office or through the FAFSA or the alternative application is confidential. It's only used to assess eligibility for financial aid. That's it. When the colleges do ask for additional information, just make sure you follow up with them. If you do send any documentation, make sure you don't send your only copy. Always have a copy handy. I also tell families, when you're working with a large institution and you have a unique situation and you tell your story to someone in the financial aid office, take their name and number down. So you can always go to the same person so you don't have to repeat your story over again. Now, with the alternative application being a relatively new application, sometimes people have issues with completing it. They have some technical issues. So we come up with a few things that people should do. First of all, with the alternative application, don't do it on your mobile phone. You really can't. It's not set up currently to be mobile friendly. All right. If you're having issues with accessing or getting into the application, make sure you clear your cache. Okay. You can even open up an incognito window, which is basically like a private window, and that'll clear out the cookies and the cache, and we find that it helps quite a bit. All right. Now that the alternative application has been around for a few years, make sure you select the correct academic year. Okay. And when you are going back to make edits, start from the very beginning. Make sure you log in as a returning applicant, not as a new applicant. Make sure that you go through every single screen. It's new, we're still working, making sure the bugs are getting all taken care of. But if you have any difficulties making that, start from the beginning all the way to the end. Instead of trying to use the review sheet to the review page to make changes. And then also note that anytime you make changes or edits to the FAFSA, the alternative application, it has to be resubmitted. So you have to sign it again and then submit it again. With the alternative application, the button to actually submit won't become available to you until you both sign it, whether the student and the parent, if they're providing parental information, or just the student. We do have a user guide. That's when you go to the alternative application website, and fill it, and right at the beginning when you log in, right in the top, there's a link to the user guide. Beginning on page 12, we have a number of FAQs. Okay, so with some of the more common questions, we provide that for families. If you do have issues logging in to the alternative application, or you forgot your password and for the life of you can't get it, call our call center at 1-800-899-4722. They can address any technical issues or password issues. If any of your students need assistance one-on-one to fill out the FAFSA alternative application, contact our core members, the staff that I mentioned earlier. You go to our website at studentportal.isac.org/ISAC core. There's a zip code search engine, which I circled in red. You enter your zip code. So I entered my zip code here in Chicago, and it showed who my core members are. Okay, it shows their pictures, it shows their contact info. And for Jessica there, you can see that she also speaks Spanish. Okay, they can help you with that. If you're a school or community-based organization, you want our core members to come to your school or organization and work with your families one-on-one, we can do that. If you want to do a financial aid application workshop, we can do that. If you want to do financial aid, we can do that. We want to make sure we get those questions answered because each one can be a little bit different. And then lastly, we have a number of Spanish-speaking parents who have questions. So we set up this texting initiative where parents, Spanish-speaking parents, they can text their name, and then we'll put them in our system, and then they can text us questions, and then we'll also send reminders throughout the year, like when the alternative application of the FAFSA become available. If for whatever reason we're going to run out of state money, the MAP grant, we'll send out a text letting them know. But this is a way by which we can have families, Spanish-speaking families support. We can support them. As a first-generation college student myself, my parents wanted to help. They didn't know how. Okay, they were supportive emotionally. They were there for me, but oftentimes they were lost. And when parents feel more empowered, when parents feel more of the process, it creates for a better situation. Whether the student is undocumented or whether the student is documented, but the parents are not, ultimately, we want to help them. And so hopefully this information will be a benefit to you, and hopefully we'll have fewer issues down the road when your students are ready to fill out their financial aid application. All right, thank you so much. I'm going to see if there's any questions. Let me end the slideshow. Stop sharing. If you have any questions, you can take yourself off mute if you do have any questions. I know it's not the most riveting information in the world, but sometimes, knowing this stuff can really help make it easier for your students once they're ready to go to college. So. Okay. Oh, you're quite welcome, David. And I'm going to put my info in the chat too, my email address. So in case you ever have any specific, you know what, I'm going to give you my direct work number too. If you have any complicated situations and you need a sounding board, I'd be happy to help you out. Just give me a call. That's my work cell phone number, or send me an email. I do have access to all the FAFSAs in the state of Illinois and alternative applications, so I can actually also look them up if needed. All right. If there aren't any other questions, oh, good. I'm glad. Then I guess we can go early, right, Lupe? She's the boss here, so tell me what to do.
Abel's the boss here, but thank you so much for this wonderful information. Yeah, we have the next session is going to be starting at 2:15. You all are welcome to join other sessions. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Bye, everyone.